Hi and welcome to the channel. Today I want to talk to you about a patch, attending to your requests on diving a little bit into Pink Floyd and some of its iconic synth sounds. Well, you should know by now by the title of this video and by the name of the patch displayed here that the patch that I bring for you today is for the Pink Floyd song called Shine On You Crazy Diamond, a song from 1975 that the band did in honor to Syd Barrett, a former member of the band that had to leave the project due to mental illness. In essence, this patch is very simple because Wright recorded this on a Mini Moog, basically making use of reverb and a lot of compression, as Pink Floyd was one of the pioneers of using the synthesizer in progressive rock. And if you have been following this channel, you probably know I do have a Mini Moog, so stick with me till the end of the video and I'll show you how this patch sounds in the Mini Moog. Before you guys start to criticize me that I didn't play exactly like Wright, I just wanted to give you the flavor of this song for copyrights and everything and not make a perfect cover there in the introduction, okay? This song was originally recorded using the Solina as the strings and a Hammond organ as well. So what you hear in the background of the introduction are my plugins for those synths that I don't have in physical version. So you can build this patch with me if you're interested. Without further ado, let's deep dive in how to recreate this sound. If you've been following this channel and the other patches in our patches series, you know that I like to start with the voice menu. And since what we are trying to emulate here is the Mini Moog, we will set our polyphony to mono. And I've also added the analog field to about 53 points here. Another trick that you learned before in our videos when simulating an analog sound is to turn the random phase on, which will allow the oscillator wave to continuously oscillate even when you're not triggering the keyboard, which is the normal behavior of an analog. And I also like to turn the warm mode on, which gives us more of this analog synthesizer feeling, right? In essence, what this patch is, it's a sawtooth wave with a very delicate attack envelope. But what I tried to do in this patch, more than only emulating the sounds of the Moog, is to make it very playable. So I spend a lot of time fine-tuning for the way I like the sensitivity on the keyboard and the way I thought that the envelope sounded more like the original song. So just to show you here on the mixer, this is a patch with only one oscillator 1, that is set to its maximum volume. So let's have a look here at the oscillator configuration. So oscillator 1 is in sawtooth, single mode, no other setting here. But on mutant 1, you can see here that I have a tiny bit of linear frequency modulation, and that's just giving a small texture, small flavor to the sawtooth. And the values here are set so that we have as a source a triangle wave to the ratio of 2. The depth is set to 128, no feedback, and in the dry wet just 7% to give this very subtle modulation in the sound. And in the mixer here you can see that the oscillator 1 volume is set to 128. Now, talking about the filters, we know that the Mini Moog has a 24 dB per octave ladder filter, but in my case here, I actually thought that I got closer to the recording when I have chosen low pass filter 3 ladder here. My cutoff value was set on 58.6, tiny bit of resonance 17.1, and here it starts a little bit the discussion with the interaction and the playability of this patch. I'm making use of velocity envelope here to give more expression to this patch. The second identity of this sound lies on its envelope. So let's have a look at the amplifier section now. I'm also making use of the velocity envelope to affect the volume of the amplifier, or how loud this sound will be according to how strong or fast you play the keys. And since I'm using or setting this patch to be very sensitive to a light touch to allow for more expression, I actually increased the amp level to 75.6 so that the end result is louder. But all of these balances has to go according to how you would like to play this song. So try to fine tune there and find the sweet spots that works for your way of playing. But let's have a look at the envelope now. Envelope 2 that is pre-connected to the amp, so I used the default one. You can see here in my envelope scheme that I have used the non-linear transitions there between the envelope stages, but my attack value is 352, decay of 2.3 seconds. My sustain is not on the full volume, so that you get this softer sound that is following a lot the envelope, the amplifier envelope. And a little bit of release, like 38 milliseconds. To collaborate there with the reverb sounds. On the second page here for my envelope 2, you can see that the attack curve, it's on exponential -15 to have this slow attack. And also the decay curve here is set to logarithmic -32 and the release curve to exponential 23. Notice that I'm not resetting the envelope here, and remember that we have set the voice for this patch to be monophonic. One in respect to representing the Mini Moog type of behavior, but the way I set the priorities here, that you have the default priority, note priority from the Hydra, will give you this type of behavior. So that if you decide to play faster than the envelope attack here, you get that effect from a monosynth to jump the notes. Right? You get this abrupt change of the notes, characteristic to monophonic synths. That also gives a good expression, more aggressive if you wanted to do so. Otherwise, what you have to do is to respect the envelope times here, the attack times, and wait for it before you trigger the next note. And that's more like the way that Richard Wright has played on the original recording, waiting for the attack to open up the amplifier other than jumping. But as a lead sound that can be very flexible, you can choose to play this way instead of, if you wanted to, or according to the mood of the band or your performance in itself. And you must have noticed, like I said in the beginning, that this sound is very much compressed and goes through a reverb. So in the effects session here, if I look at my pre-effects, I'm actually using the compressor almost in its default values. What I have changed more here was the threshold to -32 dB and the dry wet to 31%, but I left the ratio 20:1, attack in 1 milliseconds and the release at 285 milliseconds, and I left the output value to 128. The next effect in our chain here is reverb, and the reverberation I have chosen was the Hall delay with pre-delay value to 0.5 milliseconds, time set to 3.30 seconds, tone left in 5.6, high damp 96, low damp 20.6, dry and wet at 48.6%. And last but not least, in the signal chain here, I have applied a chorus effect just as an extra modulation, very subtle, to contribute to all the modulation that is going on that we will talk up next. So I have used chorus 3 at the rate of 2.6, a depth of 14.1, no offset, feedback set to 26. I have used stereo chorus, despite the fact that the Mini Moog is mono, but the effects you can apply to your taste. I thought that the stereo chorus had a good representation of the original song, but the wet here just set to 30.9. But a big part of the expression on this patch that allows you to have all this dynamic range lies here on the mod matrix. So let's have a look there. Again, it's a lot of subtleties here, but when I use modulation, I like to start from the end to the beginning, since we have already pre-assigned LFOs here to filter and amp. So I started here in LFO 5 to do a pitch modulation of oscillator 1 that you can hear. That is oscillating while I'm on the sustain phase of the envelope. And the value I set here was on pitch just 0.8. So let's have a look at the LFO 5 before we continue to deep dive in the mod matrix here. So my LFO 5 is a sine wave at a rate of 1.95 that I thought it was an oscillation that was slow to the tempo similar to the Pink Floyd recording. It's not synced to the BPM in this case, and I used a polytrig sync for this LFO, despite the voicing is set to mono. No delay, no fade in, phase set to 0, and the level all the way to 128. So now that we know what LFO 5 is doing, let's go back to the mod matrix here. I felt that the pitch oscillation or pitch modulation done by the LFO was too linear, so in order to spice it up or make it more expressive, I'm also using poly aftertouch to influence the rate of the modulation. If I simply press, you can hear the velocity of the oscillation, but if I use aftertouch, you see that the oscillation speeds up a little, and this gives the intensity of the aftertouch if you wanted to. Another use that I'm routing here, the poly aftertouch, is to the amplifier level, so that's also why you see that when I trigger the aftertouch, the sound gets louder. If I now go to the page 2 on the mod matrix, you'll see that the poly aftertouch is also affecting the cutoff frequency of my filter 1, and that's why I get a brighter sound once activating the aftertouch. Right? You can have this range of expression. Another thing to try to make this pitch modulation even more organic was to route velocity from the keyboard to the rate of LFO 5, so that if I play louder, it will result also into slightly faster pitch modulation there. And last but not least, still trying to break this linearity of a sine wave LFO, I've also applied LFO 4 to work as a ramp of the speed in LFO 5. And the reason for that is that when you hold the note sustained for a long time, the oscillation of the pitch is not linear, right? Or it is linear, but it is changing, evolving throughout time. So let's have a look at LFO 4 here. And that's why I have used a ramp. So the longer I press, the faster the rate of LFO 5 will be. But as you can see here, I'm using a very long rate for the saw up ramp in LFO 4, and that's because I wanted to have these dynamics when you hold a note sustained for too long. This LFO is not synced to the BPM either. It's also triggered by poly mode. No decay, no fade, no phase, and it's set to 128 in the level. So back to the mod matrix here. My last page is to actually use envelope 5 to affect the filter cutoff as well. So let's have a look what envelope 5 is doing. Envelope 5 has this spike in attack and then an inverted curve for decay. Pretty much similar to the envelope we are using to the amplifier, but with a slight different values here. Hey, it's me from editing here. Yeah, just a side note, when I look at me using the last envelope to control the filter cutoff, it's clear for me that this was something I did at the end of the sound design, and that's why it's there, because I always start from the end to the beginning. But you might spare yourself the job of having to route this envelope to the filter controls in the mod matrix by simply using envelope 1 that is already pre-routed to the filter. So then it's just to configure in the filter and envelope 1 there. But both ways works. You have the values, do what is easier for you. And that's because the way the sound was designed for the song also has this attack not only in the amplifier volume, but also on how bright the sound will be after all the phases in your envelope, right? So in the Mini Moog you have those separate envelopes for the filter and for the amplifier, and that's what I'm trying to emulate here with our envelope 5. So the values for envelope 5 are 320 milliseconds for attack, decay 576 milliseconds, sustain at 78, no release time here, no delay, no holding, no quantization, and also no BPM sync. But on page 2 here you can see that I've used the curves between the phases of the envelope. So for the attack curve, exponential -29, decay curve logarithmic at -17, and since we don't have the release phase, I didn't mess up with that one there. To recap here, this is a simple sound. We have set our voicing to emulate a mono analog synthesizer with only one oscillator, one sound source. Very subtle modulation here, frequency modulation on mutant 1. We have used only filter 1 here as a low pass filter 3 letter. For no good reason, I have used the envelope 5 to modulate filter 1, but it might as well use envelope 1 as its pre-routed trigger. The amplifier is being controlled by envelope 2, which gives this soft attack, an increase of volume there. And then on the pre-effects, we are compressing this sound. This is going through the hall reverb, and last but not least, we are applying chorus to the signal chain. LFO 5 is modulating oscillator 1 pitch, and it's also being controlled by keyboard velocity and keyboard aftertouch. LFO 4 modulates LFO 5 as a sawtooth ramp that affects the long sustained note to create more dynamics. It's a very simple sound, sounds beautifully, very classic sound. I hope I honored Pink Floyd enough, and I hope you enjoyed it. As a bonus, if you stayed with me so far, since I do have the Mini Moog reissue, I have also created this patch on the Mini Moog. This is not a versus video. I know that you guys will have comments in the comment section about analog and digital, but also for the sake of sound design and this exercise, let's have a look of how does this sound on the Mini Moog. So if you followed me till here, like I promised in the beginning of the video, I wanted to show you the same patch, but now in the Mini Moog, which was the synthesizer used by Pink Floyd in the original song. Well, this is actually the last video I'm going to make with this Moog before sending it to service, because while doing this patch, I used the back panel patch base over there to route my aftertouch to the opening of the filter. But I was notified by Moog that my serial number might be affected by an aftertouch problem on the keyboard, so that you can see here I have very little sensitivity on the aftertouch pressure. It's more like an on and off. On and off switch here instead of a smooth ramp like you would expect on a high-end product aftertouch. Essentially this patch is exactly the same. It's one oscillator in sawtooth being pitch modulated. In the reissue here I'm using the dedicated LFO, but most likely in the vintage version oscillator 3 was used in LFO frequencies here to modulate the pitch. I'm also using the modulation for the filter cutoff frequency, and as I mentioned in the explanation for the Hydra, the Mini Moog has one envelope dedicated to the amplifier or the volume and a separate envelope here just dedicated to the filter. The Mini Moog also don't have a release phase, and I'm compensating this a little bit with my reverb here like they did it on the recording. I will show you the dry sound now. So as soon as I release the note, the envelope will cut the sound immediately. Of course, I can use the envelope on decay mode, but for this specific patch, I have chosen to keep my decay phase and have my release actually delegated to the reverb. I'm using my Boss Space Echo, also reissue the 202, together with the Danelectro chorus, the Cool Cat, just to give this extra modulation the same way as we used effects in the Hydrasynth. On the Mini Moog, of course, you can hear the monophonic note priority way of playing. That gives that extra bite or click to the sound. The patch is in essence very simple, and as I mentioned in my previous review for the Mini Moog, the thing with a vintage synth is that the sounds are there out of the box, right? I don't have to create all that modulation and configuration setup to achieve this sound. That's the sound of this type of machine, that you recognize it immediately from the recording. So in that sense, it's much easier to use an analog system, but in the other hand, you have all that analog uncertainty, which is part of the spice, but I had to tune my instrument several times before it really warms up. And you have things like, when we look at the modulation here in the mod wheel, you'll see that I barely activate the modulation and I already get to levels of pitch modulation that are unusable. So it's really like about sweet spots. But anyhow, I could not resist to try out the patch in the Mini Moog. So let me know in the comments, what do you think? I'm pretty happy with the result in the Hydra as well. It is really neat to be able to dial in all the values and have that consistency that a digital system can give you. But it's also very fun to play with the uncertainties of an analog, and you get all the characteristics of the monophonic with the note priority on the keyboard. That can give you this extra layer of expression when making your sound. Well, I hope this video was entertaining for you. Let me know in the comments if you have tried out the patch in your Hydra. And as always, thanks for watching.